I think it's really important to note that Haiti's always been the worst place in the Western Hemisphere to be a woman, to be a girl. The maternal mortality rate is the highest, has the lowest literacy rate, and the lowest life expectancy for women, all in Haiti. Before the earthquake, Haiti's maternal mortality rate was 1 in 47, and it's become worse. So things are quite grim. 60% of adult women are illiterate. 40% of women of childbearing age lack access to contraception in Haiti. Haiti has the highest fertility rate, 4.7 children per woman on average, 4.7. Think about our own families here in the United States. And they have a rising case of forced pregnancies due to rape. If you think about that, we are just going to see a huge group of kids born of rape, and how heartbreaking that is for mother and child. The United Nations Population Fund thinks that Haiti's birth rate has tripled since the earthquake. And in some ways, most tragically of all, there is just huge gender-based violence. Already before the earthquake, 70% of women and girls were victims or survivors of gender-based violence, and that's shifted remarkably. So those are some numbers that I think are important for all of us to keep in our mind's eye. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I saw when I was there. I went fairly soon after the earthquake, and I went with a congressional delegation led by Senator Landrieu. So I got on one of those U.S. government planes and was briefed by the general in command. And he said two things that were very compelling. First of all, he said, it's going to take 1,000 days, 1,000 trucks to get rid of all the rubble. And I think actually in my last trip, a lot of rubble's gone, and that's really progress. He also said, and it may have been the first thing he said, if you're really going to change Haiti, you have to change life for women and girls. Now, it's not really what you'd expect to have as the first words out of the mouth of the general in command. He talked a lot about the culture, and a culture in which women aren't valued, and in which there is very little reproductive health and family planning already. And women have been using the orphanages to put their kids up for adoption when they're ready to start a new family. So they lose a husband, they need to be free from kids in order to start a new family, and they put their kids in an orphanage. Heartbreaking story, and I was really struck by that. But then I was struck, and I think it's really important to say, walking through the camps, by the resilience of the people. I looked left, and there were women and girls who were doing pedicures and manicures, and I looked right, and there was a salon, somebody doing hair, and a bunch of young people had set up a TV to watch sports. And then at the edge of one of the camps, there was a bar, and in honor of us, they'd put an umbrella over all of the liquor. So it was a real mixture of incredible tragedy, but also the resilience of the people there. That said, when I went back to see what the UN Foundation through the UN had funded, I was struck by the fact that, yes, things are getting better, and at the same time, people were very resigned to it just being that way. They thought, we're going to be living in these tents forever and ever. And what the women and the girls talked about more than anything was the violence. So one of the things that we supported through the UN Population Fund at the request of the women and girls of Haiti was solar lighting. And the solar lights were placed according to the women's needs. So you go into a camp, and one of the camps I visited was what was called a spontaneous tent camp. Spontaneous meant almost 50,000 people gathered there and lived there, quite well organized actually. And the women of that camp met and decided where they wanted the solar lights. And that's how the whole project has worked. And so what they said was that they felt in greatest danger going to the clinic and in greatest danger going to the latrine. And that's where we placed the lights strategically. They then went on to tell me stories about the extremity of the violence, and that, yes, some of the violence was of opportunity, But the worst violence was the targeted violence. And the men who would watch the girls and watch the women and then take advantage at some strategic point. And I talked to some of the really remarkable grassroots groups who were trying to combat the violence. They were trying to protect each other. And yet what would happen was they would go to the police or the leadership of the camps, and they really weren't getting the recourse they wanted. Now, I think over time this is starting to change, and what I am hearing is that even though there isn't legal recourse, they are starting to get a little bit more support. The other thing that we're seeing is, if you think about healthcare systems, not only did they demolish, the earthquake demolished a lot of the clinics, we lost a lot of providers. So right after the earthquake, I remember talking to the UN Population Fund, and they said, we expect 7,000 births in the month of February, and many of them are going to be on sidewalks. We had about 200 nurse midwives, and now we're down to 75. And so that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with, and we've been able to support a few clinics. We're building about 10 reproductive health clinics through the United Nations Population Fund, and they probably need about 1,000 clinics. So it really is a system that is slowly creeping back, but not where we want it at all. I will say two more things. One is that we really do have to attend to the cultural disparities around women and girls. One of the most heartbreaking things that the girls told me was that when something was wrong in a family, whether it was that somebody was sick or there wasn't enough money, what happened was that the girls were pulled from school and the guys were put forth. And if there was a little bit of money and there was a choice, the boys were put in the better school and the girls in the worst school. So we really have to begin to think how we can help and how they themselves, and I think there's a lot of grassroots groups and NGOs and UN agencies who are really thinking hard about how you, within a culture, can begin to shift some of these things. Finally, I'll say the UN Population Fund did a survey of 2,500 households, and one of the things they found was that 80% of the households were near home. So even though over 1 million people living in tents, and some of those tents set up very randomly and in sort of vast array of places, the places that they want to end up are not far away. So that as all of us collectively, the government of Haiti and people on the ground, work to provide services, to provide education and clinics, hopefully they're going to be in places that are going to be there for the long term, so that when somebody moves back to their home and does reconstruct, the school down the street or the clinic down the street that we build is going to serve people who really want to go there.